My name is Barbara Cole. I'm 68 years old, a retired trauma nurse, and a mother of one. I live alone now in the same small town where I once raised a boy who used to bring me wildflowers in a mason jar after school. People think time softens things, but some truths don't fade, they sharpen. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I made the call. Jason hadn't answered my last few texts, and I'd seen photos of Emma, his fiancée, trying on dresses with her mother. Photos I wasn't tagged in, obviously. I just wanted to ask a simple question. "When's the wedding?" I said when he picked up. There was a pause, and then flat, casual, like he was talking about weather. "We already got married, Mom." I didn't understand. "What do you mean? When?" "Yesterday, just a small ceremony." Another pause. "We only invited people who really matter." He said it as if it were nothing, as if I weren't the woman who held his feverish body through childhood flus or worked doubles every Thanksgiving to keep the lights on. I opened my mouth, but he wasn't finished. "Just send the keys to the lake cabin, okay? Don't ruin our honeymoon with your need for control." Control. That word hung in the air like smoke. I looked down at the phone in my hand. I could hear Emma's laughter in the background, faint and distant. "I see," I said, calm, controlled. "I'll send them." Then I hung up. I sat in silence for a long moment. The clock ticked in the kitchen. The kettle began to whistle. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower buzzed. Only one day later, I sent his wife a package. Not a gift, not keys, legal papers. And they made her panic. Pause. I know. That probably sounded dramatic, but let me explain. Let me walk you back through the cracks that came before the collapse. Because stories like these, they never begin with a phone call. They begin with a whisper, a hesitation, a skipped visit, a shift in tone. And this one? It started 2 summers ago when Jason brought Emma home for the first time. But before I go there, just know this. I didn't do what I did out of spite. I did it because I recognized the pattern. Because predators wear polished smiles and manipulation often comes dressed in wedding lace. If this story feels familiar in any way, I hope you'll stay with me. Maybe you've had your boundaries mistaken for control. Maybe you've loved someone so much you didn't notice they were slowly walking away. Wherever you are, I'd love to hear your story too. Let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to protect something sacred, even if that something was just yourself. Let's begin. The cabin wasn't always mine. It started as a weekend rental, $60 a night if you brought your own linens. Doug and I found it one June, 2 years before Jason was born. He always loved the water, even when it was too cold for swimming. That first morning, we drank instant coffee on the dock, barefoot, while mist curled off the lake, like steam from an old kettle. "This place feels like it remembers things," Doug said, squinting into the sun. Back then, it was just a place, but after he died, it became an anchor, something that held when everything else fell apart. Jason was only 6 when I bought the cabin outright. It cost me more than I had and nearly all the insurance money. People told me I was foolish to buy a wooden box in the woods, especially when I had hospital bills and a son to raise. But I wasn't investing in property. I was salvaging memory. That first summer, it was just the 2 of us. Jason learned to swim there. He was a skinny, sunburned boy with gap teeth and goggles that always fogged up. We'd pack peanut butter sandwiches and drift in an old canoe, counting dragonflies. At night, I'd light citronella candles and read aloud while he built towers from pine cones and sticks. We didn't have much. Most dinners were pasta with frozen peas or grilled cheese from bread gone a little stale. But he never complained. He used to say the cabin made everything taste better. I worked night shifts that whole year. Emergency room, mostly. Long hours, heavy bodies, stitched wounds. There's a quiet desperation in that line of work. You learn to stand still while people bleed. You learn to smile while holding pressure. I'd come home at dawn, sleep 4 hours, make Jason breakfast, and then take him to school. It wasn't sustainable, but we made it work. The cabin was our reward. Every time we crossed the wooden bridge into Tahoe, he'd shout, "We're home!" That's what it became, a second home. Not because it was bigger or prettier or had better Wi-Fi, it didn't, but because it held the best version of us, the unbroken version. I remember the summer he turned 12, his feet suddenly too big for his shoes, his voice cracking like the screen door. We got into our first real fight. He didn't want to go. He wanted to stay in town with his friends, play video games, do normal stuff. I packed anyway. I told him, "You don't have to love it now. Just remember it later." That year, he caught his first fish, a smallmouth bass, barely legal size, but the pride on his face could have lit the whole lake. He insisted we cook it over the fire, even though I had chicken in the cooler. That night, he carved his initials into the railing of the dock, JC07, right beside where his father had once scratched a tiny heart. He never knew that. Doug's carving had faded almost invisible by then, weathered to near extinction. But I saw it. And I remembered. As Jason grew older, the trips became less frequent. High school brought girlfriends, college brought internships, summers filled with other plans. But whenever we went, no matter how short the visit, he'd always walk straight to the dock, sit cross-legged and say, "God, I miss this." He once told me, "If I ever get married, I want to do it right here, barefoot, just like you and Dad used to be." I smiled and nodded, but part of me knew people make those promises easily when they're young, when love still feels like a fire that never burns out. The cabin became quieter after that. I still went, every fall for the leaves, every spring to air out the place. I repainted the shutters myself, fixed the creaky step Doug always tripped on, learned how to snake a drain without calling the neighbor. And still, it was ours, mine and Jason's. A place that held scraped knees and shared secrets. The time he told me he was scared of thunderstorms, and I confessed I still was too. The night he asked if I ever missed his father, and I said every single day. These weren't just memories, they were stitched into the walls, in the floorboards that creaked a certain way, in the dented coffee table from when he jumped off the couch, pretending to be a superhero. So when Jason asked for the keys, like they were nothing more than a favor, when he said, "Don't ruin our honeymoon with your need for control," I thought about all those summers, all those years I carried this cabin, not as a place, but as proof. Proof that I had built something, that I had held the storm and survived, and that I had loved him, truly, fully, without keeping score. So no, I didn't send him the keys, because the cabin isn't just a vacation home. It's a memory that deserves to be protected, even if it's from my own son. It was the first week of June, right before Jason's 32nd birthday, when he brought Emma to meet me. He called the day before, said they'd be passing through, and thought it'd be nice to stop in for dinner. He sounded casual, but there was something in his voice, an edge of performance, like someone rehearsing a speech they hadn't quite memorized. I spent the morning cleaning the baseboards and polishing the good silver, which was ridiculous in hindsight. I even changed out of my house dress and put on mascara I hadn't worn since my sister's funeral. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to remind him I was still here, that I could still matter. When they pulled into the driveway, I saw her first through the screen door, tall, elegant, carrying a bottle of wine like she belonged in a magazine ad for French kitchens. Emma. She had the kind of presence that made rooms rearrange themselves. Dark hair tied back in a low bun, soft blouse tucked into tailored slacks. The kind of woman who looked like she traveled with lint rollers and calligraphy pens. She greeted me with a firm handshake, cool fingers, and a curated smile. "It's so lovely to finally meet you, Barbara," she said. "Jason talks about the cabin all the time." That was the first time she mentioned it. She said it again 20 minutes later, standing in my kitchen, complimenting the view out the window. "You're so lucky to have that place on the lake. It's charming, so peaceful, and the real estate value must be incredible." She smiled, but her eyes didn't hold. Do you go there often alone? The third mention came over dinner. I'd made baked ziti, Jason's favorite since he was 10. He didn't seem to notice. He let Emma do most of the talking. I've always dreamed of owning a second home somewhere quiet, she said. A place to unplug, maybe raise a family part-time. It's smart, you know? To invest in legacy properties, especially if there's no mortgage involved. Jason laughed, not unkindly. Mom's owned that place since I was a kid. It's basically a time capsule. Then Emma leaned forward just slightly, like someone about to offer a toast. Have you ever thought about what happens to the cabin in the long run? Like, is there a will? I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. Jason shot her a look. Emma. She waved him off, smiling. I'm just curious. It's good to plan ahead. My dad always says estate clarity prevents family drama. Estate clarity. I laughed softly, but I felt my stomach tighten. Well, I said, the cabin will go where it's meant to go. She didn't press after that, but she didn't need to. Jason, for his part, looked proud. Not affectionate or tender, just proud. The way someone might look at a rare coin they'd acquired through clever bidding. It was subtle, but I saw it. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the living room with the overhead lights dimmed. The wine glass Emma had used still sat on the end table, a ring of lipstick barely visible on the rim. Something about her felt off, too polished, too interested, too curated. I told myself I was being unfair, that I was just protective, that I wasn't used to another woman speaking so fluently in the language of assets and ownership. But even then, I knew better. You learn a few things working night shifts in the trauma ward. You learn to feel it in your bones when something doesn't line up, when someone's story is too neat, when charm masks calculation. A few days later, I mentioned Emma to my friend Marlene, who works part-time at the courthouse. Just in passing, nothing accusatory. I just said Emma used to be a lawyer, and Marlene's brow furrowed. Used to be, she asked. That name sounds familiar. The next day, Marlene called. She passed the bar in 09, practiced corporate litigation, but she dropped out of the field entirely 5 years ago. No public explanation. Her license is inactive. She doesn't show up on LinkedIn. It's like she erased herself. I didn't know what to make of that. I didn't tell Jason. I didn't confront Emma. I folded the knowledge quietly like a note tucked into a drawer. Because here's the truth. When you've raised a child from diapers to diplomas, you learn to pick your moments. I told myself, if he's happy, I should be happy too. But I wasn't, not really, and I hadn't been since the moment she asked me about my will. After that dinner, Jason's calls became shorter, then less frequent, then almost non-existent. I told myself it was just life. He had a demanding job, a new relationship, friends, obligations. It's normal, right? Grown children drift. It's what they do. But something about this drift felt different. Whenever I did call, Emma was the one who picked up. Always cheerful, always polite. Too polite. Oh, hi, Barbara. Jason's just stepping into the shower. Want me to tell him you called? The first time, I said yes. The second time, I said I'd call back. By the fifth, I stopped trying. She'd always end the call with something like, we're trying to be more intentional with our space these days. You know, just carving out boundaries. That word again, like a polite way of saying, you're not welcome here. On Thanksgiving, I cooked a whole turkey anyway. Out of habit, more than hope. I set the table for 3. Me, Jason, and some part of him I hadn't spoken to in weeks. I placed the wine glasses like I always did, folded the napkins into careful triangles. They sent a photo from a ski resort in Colorado, matching puffer jackets. Jason holding up a mug of cider. Emma's hand tucked perfectly into his arm. The caption read, "Grateful for new traditions." I stared at the screen long enough for the image to burn into my vision. I didn't comment. I didn't like it. I just turned off the phone and poured myself a glass of wine. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your bones. By Christmas, I tried not to expect anything at all. Still, I baked his favorite cookies, ginger molasses, the kind that crack at the top. I decorated the tree, even brought down the wooden soldier ornament he made in 2nd grade. His name was carved on the back in crooked letters, Jason 99. It snowed that night, heavy, thick flakes that blanketed the street and softened the world. Around 7 o'clock, I picked up the phone and called. Straight to voicemail, I called again, busy, again. Eventually, the line stopped ringing altogether. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the front window, and watched the snow pile up on the railing. A car passed every few minutes, headlights washing over the frost. The tree blinked behind me in soft amber. I sat there for a long time, cup cooling in my hands, asking myself the question I hadn't dared say aloud until that moment. When did I become a guest star in my own son's life? I thought about all the years I'd spent keeping his world upright. Doctor's visits, last-minute science projects, scraped knees, broken hearts, the whispered bedtime promises, the lunches with hidden notes, the way he'd crawl into my lap at age 9, too old for it but not quite ready to let go. And now, what was I? A holiday afterthought. A woman with control issues who needed to learn about boundaries. Somewhere between the snow falling and the tea going cold, I realized the stillness I was sitting in wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that came just before a storm, not the kind you see coming, the kind that's already started, quietly beneath the surface. It was a Thursday morning in early spring, the kind of morning where the air still holds a trace of winter, but the light has softened. Hopeful, tentative. I was scrolling through my phone while my tea steeped, just passing time. I wasn't expecting anything. Certainly not that. There it was. Emma's latest Instagram post. A photo taken at a golf course, manicured greens stretching out behind them, Jason in a crisp button-down, Emma in white, holding her left hand up to the camera like a spotlight. A large, glittering ring caught the sun. Her caption read, "Forever starts here, hundreds of likes, dozens of comments. Congratulations, beautiful. You two are perfect." Oh my God, finally. Not one mention of me, not even a tag for Jason's family. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, blinking, hoping the words would rearrange themselves, that maybe I'd missed an earlier call, a message, some heads up, but there was nothing. No call, no email, no text, just the digital announcement of one of the most significant moments of my son's life, shared with the internet before it was ever shared with his mother. I felt the tea bag slip from my hand and sink into the cup. I hadn't even realized I'd steeped it. I called Jason. He picked up on the third ring, breathless. "Hey, Mom." I didn't mention the post, not yet. "Hi, sweetheart. I just saw something on Instagram. Are you engaged?" A beat of silence. Then, "Oh, yeah. Yeah, we are." His voice shifted into a rush. "Sorry, we meant to call. It just happened last night. We were going to call you this morning." I walked slowly to the kitchen table, sat down. "Congratulations," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "Tell me everything." He did, or rather, he told me what Emma had planned. She booked a private dinner at the golf club, had it all arranged with the chef. Then, after dessert, she pulled out this little box and said she had a surprise. "I was going to propose next week, Mom, but she beat me to it." He laughed, like it was cute, like it didn't feel strange that the proposal came from her, staged on camera in a curated setting. "And the ring?" I asked gently. "Oh, her dad gave her his mother's diamond. They had it reset in New York. Honestly, it's incredible. She's over the moon." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "She's very organized," Jason chuckled. "Tell me about it." "Her parents are already talking about venues. Do you need help with anything?" I offered. "Planning, dress shopping, food tastings. I'd love to be part of it." There was a pause. Well, the thing is, Emma's family has a lot of traditions. Her mom is really into planning. They've already kind of taken the reins. I kept my tone steady. And you're okay with that? Yeah, it takes the pressure off. You know me, I hate that stuff. I hesitated. Then, when's the engagement party? A longer pause this time. It's next Saturday, he said, voice dropping slightly. But it's just going to be small. Close friends and immediate family, I stared out the window at the pale blooms budding on the dogwood tree. Should I plan to drive up Friday? Another pause, then softly, Mom, I think it's better if you sit this one out. I felt something cold settle into my chest. Why? It's not that you're not important, he rushed. It's just that her family has this rhythm, you know? And we want to keep it intimate. Like the decades I'd spent raising him somehow didn't qualify. I see, I said. Please don't be upset, he added quickly. We'll have something just us soon, maybe dinner or a weekend together. I promise I didn't respond right away. I just watched the wind catch the edge of the curtain. The sky had darkened slightly, clouds rolling in over the quiet neighborhood. I hope it's beautiful, I said finally, and that you feel loved. That's all I ever wanted for you. I do, Mom. I really do. But he didn't sound sure. We ended the call a few minutes later, and I just sat there, in the same kitchen where I'd once taught him how to cut out sugar cookies, where we used to rehearse spelling words at the counter, where he sat in my lap the day he got rejected from his first college choice and cried into my cardigan. That afternoon, I stood in the hallway staring at a framed photo of us from his high school graduation. In the photo, he's grinning, arms around my shoulders. My eyes are crinkled from smiling too hard, and we're both covered in confetti. I didn't cry, but something inside me folded, not broke, just bent, quietly. The kind of bending that happens when you realize someone you raised has found a new orbit, and you're no longer the sun. The engagement party came and went without a word from Jason. I saw it unfold online like a stranger watching someone else's memory. There were photos, dozens of them. Emma's mother in a navy cocktail dress, standing beside her daughter with matching smiles and matching pearls. Jason, arm around Emma's waist, looking proud and polished in a suit I'd never seen before. The caption read, "A night to remember." Grateful for family, I wasn't tagged. Of course I wasn't tagged. I scrolled through every frame, searching for some trace of him I recognized. A smile that wasn't for the camera, a glance toward the door as if expecting me to arrive late. But there was nothing. No chair left empty, no plate waiting in the kitchen, just a celebration I hadn't been invited to, documented in real time for everyone but me. After that, it became a pattern. Dress fittings, venue, scouting cake tasting, all online, public, curated. And I only knew what was happening because Emma had a habit of posting everything. Every step of their planning process was a highlight reel. She started a Pinterest board titled, "The Modern Wedding, Chic Meets Timeless." I recognized the florist from a shop I used to pass on my way to the hospital. I recognized the church, Emma's family's parish, not ours. But what caught me off guard most was the caption on one photo, under a series of pastel color swatches and candle samples. Jason vetoed the lake cabin, said it felt too rustic. We're aiming for sophisticated, not summer camp. I read the words 3 times, rustic, summer camp. That cabin had been his dream venue for years. He once told me he wanted fairy lights strung between the trees and bare feet on the dock. He used to draw sketches of it in his school notebooks. But now, it was a punchline, a style to be dismissed. And just like that, another door closed. Not slammed, not locked, just quietly shut. I didn't ask him about it. I didn't confront him. I didn't accuse or plead. I just started writing things down, not in a vengeful way. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was recording. Because if no one else was going to remember what came before, I would. I bought a cheap composition notebook and labeled it with his name. I wrote down dates, phrases. The first time Emma asked about the will, the first time I noticed Jason didn't reply to a message until Emma had liked it first. I started keeping screenshots, not of everything, just the moments that stung, not to use against them, but to remind myself I hadn't imagined it, that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't misread the room. The week they chose the venue, Emma posted a photo of her and her mother holding hands in front of a French-style ballroom. The caption said, "Full circle moment, planning my wedding with the woman who taught me what love should look like." The words hit harder than they should have. I closed the app. I went outside, and I stood in the garden until the air made my eyes water. Not from sadness, not entirely, but from something heavier, like grief's distant cousin, like watching the sun set behind the same tree and realizing it doesn't shine the same anymore. I tried not to resent her. Emma wasn't the villain, not openly. She never raised her voice, never insulted me. But slowly, without making a sound, she moved into every part of Jason's life I used to inhabit, and she didn't share. That was the difference. She closed the doors one by one, until the only place left for me was on the outside, watching through the cracks. Still, I said nothing, because I wanted to believe he'd come back on his own, that at some point the fog would lift. But even hope has a shelf life. Even patience starts to rot if it sits too long. And mine, though deep, though well-worn, was beginning to sour. So I kept writing, not to prepare for war, but to preserve the truth, because some things deserve to be remembered exactly as they were, especially when everyone else starts rewriting the story without you. It was a Tuesday, the kind of quiet afternoon where the sun slices cleanly through the blinds and everything smells like lemon wood polish. I had just sat down with a cup of tea, a worn paperback open in my lap, when the phone rang. Jason. I stared at the screen a second longer than I should have, debating whether to let it ring out, but my thumb moved before I could talk myself out of it. "Hi, honey," I said, keeping my voice warm, practiced. "Hey, Mom." His tone was lighter than I expected, almost too casual, like we'd just spoken yesterday, like months hadn't passed in silence. I have some news," he began. "Emma and we got married. Just a few days ago. It was small, just intimate." I blinked slowly. A long silence followed, the kind that makes the air feel thinner. "You got married," I repeated as gently as I could manage. "Yeah," he said quickly. "It all came together really fast. We didn't want a big thing, just people who really mattered." That last part stung. People who really mattered. It echoed in my chest like an old church bell. I held the silence, let him sit in it. "And," he added, stretching the word out like he was easing into ice water, "we were thinking of spending our honeymoon at the lake cabin. You know, the one in Tahoe. It's got that big deck, and the canoe's still there, right?" I closed my eyes. For a moment, all I saw was Jason at 8 years old, running barefoot across that deck with a popsicle in hand, yelling about catching minnows. And now here he was, casually requisitioning the last place on Earth that still felt like us. He kept going. It's perfect this time of year. Quiet, private, just what we need. I didn't say anything. "Mom?" he prompted. I still didn't speak. "You don't mind, do you?" he asked, his voice dipping slightly, just enough to hint that this wasn't really a question. Still, I let the pause hang. Finally, he added, "It's not like you use it much anymore. And honestly, it would mean a lot. Emma says it's really the only place that feels, authentic. We could make it our own, make it their own, as if it hadn't already belonged to something sacred." Then came the twist of the knife. "And Mom, please don't make a big thing out of this, okay? I know how you can be. You always had that need to control everything. We just want a peaceful start." I almost laughed, but my throat was too tight. Control. That word again. It followed me now like a shadow, used against me whenever I asked questions, whenever I didn't bend easily, whenever I tried to hold on to something that mattered. Funny. I'd spent the better part of 2 decades relinquishing control, first to motherhood, then to grief, then to the slow erosion of being left behind. I had let go of my body, my sleep, my savings, my dreams, and yes, even my time, all for Jason. I had walked through fire to keep him safe, warm, and whole. And now, the last thing I owned that still carried my heartbeat, he wanted that too. Quietly, casually, as if it were owed. I finally spoke. My voice didn't crack, it didn't rise, but it carried weight. "I'll think about it," I said simply. He exhaled, relieved. "Thanks, Mom." "You're the best." I hung up without saying goodbye. Then I set the phone down gently, rose from the couch, and walked to the cabinet near the fireplace. Inside, behind some old holiday linens, was a small safe box. I opened it slowly, reached in, and pulled out 2 sets of keys, the original and the backup, both cool and familiar in my palm. I sat at the kitchen table, keys between my fingers, and stared at the wood grain. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just let the silence fill the room like water rising in a well. He thinks I'm controlling, I thought. But no. Control is when you force someone into silence. What I was holding wasn't control. It was clarity. It was boundary. It was the echo of everything I had once sacrificed for a child who now spoke to me like a landlord requesting a spare set of keys. I placed one key back in the box. The other I slid into my pocket. Then I made a phone call of my own, not to Jason, to someone else, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hi," I said, steady as a drumbeat. "It's Barbara." "Yes." "I'm ready to move forward with the paperwork we talked about." "Yes." "It's about the cabin." And just like that, something shifted, not out of vengeance, not even out of hurt, but out of something stronger, the instinct to protect what little remained of myself. There's a myth that mothers always know, that something stirs in our bones the moment things shift. That instinct kicks in like an old watch, quiet, precise, inevitable. It wasn't quite like that. It was slower, like waking from a long sleep and realizing the house you're in doesn't feel like home anymore. After that call from Jason, after the keys were requested like a formality, I knew I couldn't sit in the quiet anymore. I had spent too long believing that silence was grace, that patience was virtue. But I wasn't patient anymore. I was awake, and I began where I always do when something doesn't feel right, at the edges. I remembered a name, Kelly Monroe. Emma had mentioned her once at dinner, said they interned at the same firm in San Francisco. Kelly had become a family lawyer, moved to Oregon. I found her through a professional directory, and I did what most mothers in my position would do. I called. It wasn't a long conversation. Kelly's voice softened when I introduced myself. "Barbara, Emma's mother-in-law?" Wow. It's been a while since I heard that name. "Good memories?" I asked carefully. There was a pause. Then, "Emma's always been ambitious." I didn't press, just listened. Then Kelly let something slip. Last I heard, she was working on another asset transfer case, but that was after her own mess. I blinked. Her own mess? Another pause. "You didn't know?" "No." She was married before. Briefly. A real estate investor named Tyler Grant. It was a big deal when they split, right after she was added to his second home in Lakeport. She walked away with half, legally airtight. Tyler was furious. I thanked Kelly and hung up with trembling hands. Emma, married before, got herself added to a property, then left. Now she wanted the cabin. That night, I stared at my ceiling for hours. I could hear the creak of wood in the wind, the soft hum of the heater. My house felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else, or like I was only borrowing it. I woke before sunrise and made a decision. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was certainty. I needed help. I called a private investigator, not the kind you find in a newspaper ad, but someone discreet, used to cases where proof was fragile and urgency was buried in subtlety. Her name was Angela, older woman, steady voice, asked no unnecessary questions. Within days, she began sending me updates. Nothing was dramatic at first. Receipts, car rentals, Emma's change of last name, a list of recent property inquiries. Then, 3 weeks into her digging, Angela called. "I found something in the county's online property records," she said. "Go on." "There was a preliminary submission 2 days ago, a quitclaim deed. It hasn't been processed yet, but it's sitting in the digital record system, pending approval." "For what?" "Transfer of your cabin's ownership from sole proprietorship under your name to co-ownership between Jason and Emma." My mouth went dry. "They filed it?" "Yes. The form is partially filled. Your name is listed as the current owner. Jason and Emma are the grantees. But there's no signature from you, no notarization either. Just submitted." I pulled my laptop close and opened the county portal. It took me less than a minute to find it. There it was. Document ID, QCD 8729TAHOE, filed under, pending review. Filed by Jason Cooper and Emma Walker, Cooper. Date, 3 days after their wedding. There was a box for grantor's signature. Empty. The audacity took my breath away. They didn't even ask. They just assumed. Or maybe they thought I wouldn't notice. Maybe they thought I'd be too quiet, too old, too tired to fight back. Or maybe, worst of all, they thought they were entitled. I sat there, staring at the screen. My tea went cold. My hands, though, were steady. People often mistake quiet for weakness. They think mothers forget. That time softens our spines. But no, time sharpens them. I printed the page, filed it in a red folder I had labeled cabin. Then I wrote a letter. Not to Jason, but to my estate lawyer. And at the bottom, in my cleanest handwriting, I added a note. Ensure full legal control remains with me. No transfer without my direct, notarized authorization. Ever. Then I underlined the last word twice. I wasn't just protecting a cabin. I was protecting the last thread of myself. I didn't send the keys. I sent a box, wrapped in crisp silver foil tied with a white satin bow, elegant and unassuming. No note on the outside. No return address. Just a carefully printed label addressed to Mrs. Emma Walker Cooper. Overnight delivery. Inside, a thin stack of papers, precisely clipped. A red post-it on top in my handwriting. I hope you're more honest this time around. Underneath that, a certified copy of Emma's divorce decree from 2019, the legal proceedings with Tyler Grant, the timeline, the asset transfer, the Lakeport property, her request to be added to title 6 months before separation, his petition for reversal, her refusal to settle, the final order in her favor. It was public record, but not public knowledge. Until now. I didn't expect immediate fireworks, but I didn't have to wait long. The next afternoon, I was tending my herbs on the windowsill when the phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Same number. I picked up. "Hello?" A breath on the other end. Then, "Barbara?" Her voice was thinner than I remembered, stripped of its usual syrup. "Yes? This is Emma," I gathered. Pause. "I got your gift." Silence. "And?" Another pause. "What are you planning to do with that information?" I wiped my hands with a dish towel, looked out over the lake. "I'm not planning to do anything, dear. But why would you send that to me? Why now?" I kept my voice level. "Because my son deserves to know who he married." Before you touch anything that doesn't belong to you, I haven't. You've already filed for the cabin, Emma. Don't insult us both. More silence. I could hear her breathing. Fast, shallow, like she was pacing. Then sharper. You don't understand. Jason loves me. He wanted to put me on the deed. Jason doesn't know what you did to your last husband. But I do. That was different. I'm sure it was. She raised her voice. If you're trying to ruin my marriage... I cut in, calm as ever. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm giving you a chance to start honestly. This time, the line went silent, and then I heard her whisper something, maybe to herself, maybe to someone else in the room, before she hung up. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. My heart wasn't racing. My palms weren't sweating. I didn't feel vindicated or cruel. I felt still, like I just put a stone back in its rightful place, like something unspoken between me and the universe had clicked back into alignment. That evening, I went to the cupboard and pulled down a bottle of wine, the one I'd been saving for a special occasion. I poured a glass, walked outside, and sat on the porch. The lake was quiet, dusk settling over the water like a sigh. The cabin stood behind me, warm light spilling from the windows, touching the floorboards I had polished myself, walls my late husband had built with his hands, the fireplace where Jason had once read books under a wool blanket with cocoa stains on his shirt. This wasn't just a building. It was my life's witness, and it wasn't up for negotiation. Some might say I was being petty, but they didn't live my days. They didn't eat alone on holidays. They didn't receive the phone calls only when favors were needed. They didn't hear their child echo someone else's words when they said, "You're trying to control us." They didn't survive betrayal wrapped in civility, but I did, and I wasn't bitter. I was clear. This wasn't revenge, it was revelation. The next day, my lawyer called to confirm that the formal cease and desist letter had been sent to Jason and Emma. No ownership transfer could proceed without my express, notarized permission. The county clerk had been notified. The attempt had been flagged. Emma didn't call again, but Jason did. And that was another kind of conversation altogether. The night I returned to the cabin, the lake was cloaked in stillness. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the narrow driveway, headlights brushing the wooden posts Jason once painted navy blue when he was 12. I hadn't driven up here since last autumn. The pine trees had grown thicker, their shadows longer. The cabin, though, stood unchanged, sturdy, familiar. I stepped out with a small duffel bag in one hand and in the other a tin canister wrapped in a navy scarf. My late husband's ashes. Not all of them, just the last portion I'd kept, sealed away in a cupboard waiting for the right time. Tonight felt like the right time. Inside, I lit the fireplace and brewed chamomile tea. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't touch my phone. I let the silence breathe around me. The floorboard still creaked where the kitchen met the hall. The kettle still whistled too sharply. I took it all in like an old friend who needed no words. And then, when the moon had risen just high enough to cast light over the backyard, I stepped out onto the porch. Wrapped in my thick cardigan, I cradled the canister in my lap. I sat where we used to sit, me, John, and little Jason between us. Back when his feet dangled above the porch steps, and he'd laugh for no reason at all. Back when love was loud and simple. I looked toward the edge of the trees, where the big pine stood tall. Its bark was rugged with time, but at its base, faintly visible even now, were the carved letters, B plus J, Barbara, John, Jason. I hadn't been able to look at it for years without tearing up, but now I felt something different, not sadness, not nostalgia, something like completion. I walked over slowly, each step rustling the fallen pine needles. I knelt down, carefully with old bones, and opened the canister. The ashes were gray, soft. I held my breath as I tipped the container forward, letting them scatter around the roots of the tree. Some drifted gently, catching in the underbrush. Some fell like whispers onto the soil. "Home," I whispered. "You're home now." The night air was cool, brushing my cheeks like a hand I hadn't felt in years. I sat there a while, just breathing. And then, quietly, I stood. Back on the porch, I picked up my tea and gazed over the lake. The water mirrored the sky, endless black, speckled with stars. A loon called somewhere across the water. It was then I allowed myself to speak aloud. To anyone watching from afar, to those who thought they could take this from me, I hope you understand now. I took a sip of tea and closed my eyes, because here's what Emma never knew. The cabin didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the Mabel Trust, a private family trust I had established 8 years ago, named after my grandmother, Mabel Louise. The cabin was transferred into it the moment Jason graduated college. Back then, I didn't know why I did it. Just a nudge, a gut instinct. Call it foresight. Call it divine timing. Either way, the papers were signed. The cabin was no longer an asset in my personal name, which meant, even if someone tried to forge my signature, to file a change of title, they'd hit a dead end. The trust required 3 signatures to approve any property sale or transfer: mine, my attorney's, and a family friend who served as co-trustee. All legally filed, all airtight. Emma and Jason could circle the county clerk's office for months. It wouldn't make a dent. That tree Jason used to climb, that porch he spilled lemonade on, that dock where John taught him to tie fishing knots, all of it. Safe. And not just safe. Untouchable. I had made sure of it before they even thought to ask. Later that night, I lit a candle and placed it by the kitchen window. Not for ceremony, just habit. John used to joke that the cabin didn't feel like our place until there was candlelight. He said it softened the wood, reminded the shadows to be gentle. So I let it flicker into the dark. Then I pulled out a small notebook, the same one I'd used to record all the little things. Emma's comments, Jason's deflections, changes in tone, missed holidays. A ledger, not of resentment, but of patterns, of clarity. On the final page, I wrote, March 18th, final scattering. He is where he belongs. So am I, and underneath that, the cabin stands. So do I. The next morning, the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. A doe crossed the far end of the clearing, pausing to look toward me as if she knew something had shifted. I packed my bag slowly, left the candle to burn out on its own, locked the door, and walked away. Not as someone guarding her past, but as someone finally walking steady into what comes next. 3 days later, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel again. Only this time, it wasn't mine. I just set a kettle on the stove and was tying back the curtains to let the morning light in. Through the kitchen window, I saw the silver SUV pull up. He didn't park in his usual spot near the maple tree, didn't get out right away. I knew it was Jason. I didn't move, didn't straighten the magazines on the coffee table like I used to, didn't rush to put on lipstick or warm up muffins. I just waited, still, silent, steeped in the clarity of everything that had come before. The car door opened. His steps on the porch were slower than I remembered, more hesitant. He used to run up those steps, skipping the second one because it creaked. This time, he stepped right on it. It let out the same sound, low and tired, like something remembering itself. He knocked once, then again. I opened the door, not wide, just enough. He looked older, or maybe just unshaven. Eyes rimmed red, jaw set like he'd rehearsed something and now forgot every word. "Hi, Mom," he said. I nodded, saying nothing. He took a shallow breath. "Can I come in?" I held his gaze, then slowly shook my head. "No." He blinked, surprised. Hurt flashed behind his eyes. "Okay, he muttered, stepping back. That's fair. There was a long pause. The pine trees rustled gently behind him, wind threading through the needles like a whisper. The air smelled of lake water and ash, the final traces of John's presence, lingering just long enough. Why'd you do it? Jason asked finally. His voice wasn't angry, just small, like a boy who couldn't find his place on the playground. Do what? I asked calmly. The subpoena, he said. The paperwork. Emma. She's devastated. I raised an eyebrow. Is that so? He shifted, clearly uncomfortable. She didn't expect that. And the gift box with the divorce documents, that was cruel, Mom. I looked him in the eye, my voice even. Cruel is marrying in secret and calling your mother only to ask for keys to a place she built with her bare hands. Cruel is telling her she doesn't matter, then demanding what she spent her life holding together. Jason looked away. I continued, softer but firmer. You asked why I did it. The truth is, I didn't do it to punish Emma. I didn't even do it to punish you. I did it to protect what was sacred, what was nearly taken without a second thought. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His hands were in his pockets now, shoulders hunched. You chose to love someone, I said. That's your right. But that someone has a pattern. She cuts away families once they serve no use. And you didn't just let her. You helped her do it to your own. Jason swallowed hard, his lips parted, 1,000 apologies or excuses tangled in his throat, but none came out. I stepped onto the porch with him, closing the door gently behind me. You remember when your dad built this railing? I asked, placing my hand on the wood. You held the flashlight. It kept shaking in your hand, but he never snapped at you. He just said, "That's all right, buddy. We got all night." Jason's face twitched. A flicker of something passed through it. Memory, maybe, or shame. I remember, he said hoarsely. I nodded. That's what this place holds? Not just property lines or lake views. It holds the sound of your laugh before life hardened you. The smell of your father's flannel shirts. My hands carrying in groceries after double shifts so we could spend weekends here. He looked down at the porch floor. I don't want it, he whispered. My voice was steady. Good. Because you can't have it. He looked up, startled. I've placed it in a trust, I said plainly, not out of spite, but out of love. Love for what this place has meant, and to ensure it never becomes currency for someone else's game. He took a step back, like the words hit deeper than he expected. I gave a small nod, then added, You asked me why I did it. But I should ask you something, Jason. When did I become a stranger to you? His lips parted again, but still nothing came. Just silence. Heavy, humming. I didn't raise you to abandon people, I said. I raised you to notice who cooked your meals, who stayed up when you were sick, who clapped the loudest at your recitals even when your notes were off. His eyes welled, just a little. But you forgot. Or maybe you chose to forget. He turned then, slowly, stiffly, walked back down the steps, didn't skip the creaky one. At the bottom, he paused, looked back, eyes rimmed with a different kind of red this time. I didn't know, he said. I tilted my head. You didn't ask. He opened the car door. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't say, it's okay, because it wasn't. I didn't say, I forgive you, because I wasn't sure I had yet, but I did say, drive safe. He nodded. The door closed, the engine started, and Jason pulled away. Not with anger, not with entitlement, just silence, like a sun slowly waking from a long, damaging dream. That same evening, after Jason drove away, the phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message lit the screen. From Jason. Emma's gone. Packed her things. I need to think about everything I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, watching the glow fade into darkness. The house felt quieter than usual, not heavy this time, but light, like the first deep breath after rain. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. A week later, his car appeared again in the gravel driveway of the cabin. No announcement, no call ahead, just the sound of tires grinding stone. I was on the porch with my morning coffee wrapped in a blanket when he walked up. He didn't speak. Neither did I. He carried 2 cups from the cafe in town, placed one on the table between us, then sat down in the chair opposite mine. The same chair his father used to favor, the one angled toward the sunrise. We drank in silence. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and wood smoke. Across the lake, the first streaks of gold pushed over the horizon, spilling onto the water until the surface shimmered like glass. Jason leaned back, hands around his cup, eyes fixed on the ripples. He looked older, tired, worn, but softer somehow, like the sharp edges had dulled. He didn't apologize. I didn't ask him to. Instead, we sat as the morning unfolded, the 2 of us watching light bend across the lake, watching shadows retreat, watching the world start over again in quiet dignity. For a moment, it felt almost like the old days, those mornings when he was young and restless, too eager to wait for the sun to rise. He'd sit on this same porch, bundled in a blanket, asking me when the day would begin. Now here he was again, grown, scarred, searching for something he couldn't yet name, and here I was, beside him. Not as a gatekeeper, not as an enemy, simply as his mother. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of questions unspoken, of answers not yet ready, of space finally cleared for the truth to settle. When the sun rose fully, lighting the lake in silver fire, Jason exhaled. Not words, just a sound, like something loosening in his chest. I sipped my coffee. We sat there, facing the water, the horizon, and each other's presence. Not healed, not mended, but no longer broken. And for the first time in years, I believed that was enough. The next morning, Jason knocked softly on my bedroom door just after sunrise. He didn't come in, just waited. I opened the door in my robe, expecting him to ask about breakfast, or maybe say he was heading back into town, but instead he held out a small cream-colored envelope. No words, just an envelope. My name wasn't on it, neither was his. The handwriting on the flap was clean, pointed, Emma's. "Found it on the kitchen table," Jason said quietly. "Figured you should read it." He left me alone with it. I sat in the rocker on the porch and opened the letter. Inside was a single page, handwritten in blue ink. No greeting, no apology. Just this: I don't think I ever loved Jason. Not in the way he wanted or needed. I loved the way he looked at me like I was the center of something. I loved how easy he was to manage. He never questioned me. That made me feel powerful, in control, safe. There was someone else once, a man I loved deeply, but he left me when he realized I had no assets, no connections that mattered. I told myself I'd never be that powerless again. Your son was never about love. He was about stability, predictability. He was my anchor when I needed one, and the cabin was never just a house. It was proof of legacy, of belonging, of what I could own. But I see now I became everything I hated in the people who discarded me. I used him, and in doing so, I became just as empty. I'm leaving. Not because I regret it, but because I'm done pretending I don't see myself clearly. Take care of him. He deserves someone who doesn't need to own him to feel worthy. That was it. No signature, no return address. Just a full confession. Cold, clinical, disturbingly honest. I folded the letter in half, then again until it fit in my palm. For a while, I said nothing, did nothing. Just let the silence hum around me like an old, familiar tune. Somewhere in the trees, a crow let out a single call. Emma hadn't loved money. She'd loved power. The power of being desired, of being obeyed. She hadn't wanted my cabin for its view, its charm, or its memories. She wanted it because it wasn't hers, because claiming it meant rewriting the story of her own rejection. The cabin was a symbol, a throne, not a home. Jason, I realized, had simply been the hand that held the crown, and now the crown lay on the ground, tarnished, forgotten. I didn't hate her. I couldn't. She was broken in ways I understood all too well, but I pitied her, because she didn't know what it was to truly belong to something that didn't need to be owned, and perhaps never would. When I came inside, Jason was in the kitchen, rinsing out his cup. I placed the folded letter on the table and touched his shoulder lightly. "She's not your future, Jason," I said softly. "She was a mirror, and now it's broken. You don't have to stand in the reflection anymore." He didn't speak, but for the first time in years, he looked me straight in the eyes, and I saw it. The part of him that was waking up. The part of him that had almost been taken, but wasn't. Jason didn't say the words, "Can I stay?" He simply brought in a duffel bag, placed it by the foot of the stairs, and took his shoes off at the door like he used to when he was 10. I made tea without asking, and we sat on the porch in silence. The next morning, he hammered down a loose plank on the porch. By noon, we were both on our knees sanding the railings. That afternoon, I ordered wood stain. It became a rhythm, a quiet choreography of repair. There was something deeply human about working with our hands, remaking a place once bruised by memory. Jason scrubbed the kitchen tiles clean, peeling back years of grime and grief. I repainted the window frames in a soft, earthy green, the same shade his father once said reminded him of our honeymoon in Oregon. Every evening we sat with mugs of tea and aching arms. One night, as I stirred honey into my cup, Jason spoke. "I remember you and Dad dancing here once," he said. "Must have been, I don't know, maybe 8? There was music playing on that old cassette deck, and you were barefoot. You were laughing so hard I smiled. He'd stepped on my foot 3 times. And still, insisted he was leading, we both chuckled. Then I told him the full story, how his father and I met at a friend's barbecue, how he had a crooked tooth and a stubborn streak, how he never made a lot of money, but every year, on our anniversary, he saved up just enough to buy me a single violet lily. I used to wish he'd buy a bouquet, I admitted. But now, I'd give anything for just one more of those crooked little flowers. Jason looked down into his cup. He loved you. That was always obvious. Yes, I said, and I loved him. Even when it was hard, a few days later, we were oiling the floorboards in the living room. The late summer sun filtered through the cabin windows, catching the dust in golden streaks. That's when Jason said it, so softly I almost missed it. I knew. I paused, cloth in hand. Knew what? He exhaled. About Emma, about her past. Not all of it, but enough. A buddy of mine once told me she'd left someone in a pretty messy way. Said there was drama about money. I didn't want to believe it. I waited. He kept going. She told me things I wanted to hear. That I was different. That I was calm, steady. She made me feel like I was enough. For the first time in years, I felt like someone saw me. That's powerful, I said. He nodded. Yeah, but it wasn't love. It was being useful. And I mistook that for meaning I sat beside him on the floor. And now? Now, I want to stop pretending. I want to rebuild something honest, even if it's small, even if it's just me and some sandpaper in a cabin that creaks when the wind changes. My throat tightened. I placed a hand on his. Then start here. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. That week, Jason found my old recipe book and made his father's favorite chili. It was slightly too spicy, but we ate every bite. I found an old flannel shirt of his in the attic. I washed it, folded it, and left it on Jason's bed. He wore it the next morning without comment. Healing wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was in the small things, in the way he refilled the bird feeder, in how he tightened the screws on the loose kitchen cabinet, in how he sat beside me at dusk, not looking for forgiveness, just offering presence. One night, as we watched the lake shimmer under a full moon, Jason said, "I'm not proud of what I let happen. I thought I was building a life, but I was just decorating an empty house. I didn't rush to console him. Instead, I said, it takes strength to see the emptiness, and even more to choose to fill it with something real." He looked at me, eyes glassy. "Thank you, Mom." And for the first time in a long time, I believed he meant it. The maples had begun to turn. Gold bled into red, and the lake reflected every leaf like it knew the meaning of change. I was sweeping the porch when I heard the creak of boots on old wood. Jason stood at the top of the stairs holding a folded envelope in his hand, not sealed, just waiting. "I wrote something," he said. "I don't know if it's anything, but it's for you." I nodded. He sat beside me and began to read softly. "Mom, if one day I find someone again, someone honest, kind, and rooted, someone who doesn't need a stage or a strategy to love, I'll tell her this: if you cannot love the woman who raised me, then you do not truly love me. Because my mother isn't a footnote to my life. She is the page I was written on." My breath caught. Jason looked down. "It's not perfect. I just needed you to know." I reached for his hand, my thumb tracing the callus he'd gotten from fixing the stair rail last week. "No," I whispered. "It's perfect." The seasons had turned gently, and so had he. He wasn't the same boy who'd once stormed through life with blind certainty. He wasn't even the man who'd handed me betrayal disguised as a honeymoon request. He was something quieter now, softer, not weak, but honest. He stayed in the cabin that fall, helping winterize the windows and re-insulate the attic. We didn't speak of Emma, not because we were avoiding it, but because that chapter had already closed. Instead, we spoke of beginnings. We made apple cider. We fixed the mailbox. Jason went back to teaching woodworking at the community college, and I returned to volunteering at the clinic part-time, not because I had to, but because I could. The lake didn't change, but we had. A few weeks later, I found a small note left on the kitchen counter. "Went to town to pick up something. Don't cook, I'll bring dinner." He returned with chili from the farmer's market and a cinnamon pie. As we ate, he said, "There's a woman in one of my night classes. She teaches art therapy, divorced, has a daughter, doesn't wear a mask, doesn't pretend to be unbreakable. And somehow she makes me feel like I don't have to pretend either." I smiled. "That sounds like a very good start." Jason hesitated, then asked, "If it ever became something real, would you come? If I asked you to stand beside me at the wedding?" I looked out at the lake, its surface kissed with dusk light. "I'd stand beside you, behind you, in front of you, wherever you need me," I said, "as long as it's real. As long as it's true." He nodded. "That's the only kind I want now." The last leaves fell by the end of October. I kept the fireplace lit most evenings. Jason came by less frequently, building his own path again, but always with a message, a check-in, a laugh over tea. We were no longer trying to fix the past. We were building something new, rooted in the soil of everything we'd learned. Cabins still here. The lake still sleeps the same way it always did. Quiet, steady, watching. But I've learned something that only time and grief can teach you. There are things worth holding on to: memories, truth, dignity. And then there are things worth releasing, like pain that never belonged to you, like silence that kept you small, like stories written by someone else's fear. I didn't get invited to the first wedding. And maybe that was the greatest gift, because sometimes it takes being left out to finally come home to yourself. Before we say goodbye, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or maybe a late night, where stories like this help keep you company? Tell me in the comments. I read every one with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, even a little, consider subscribing to this channel. Not just to hear more stories like Barbara's, but to be part of a quiet community, one that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for being here today, wherever you are. I hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits, quietly, until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.